Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Diving into Sports podcast. It's one of your hosts, Nash Henry, and in tonight's video, I will be continuing my series that was previously only on my main channel called Spilling the Teal, where I only talk about Jaguar stuff, my favorite NFL team, if you didn't know already. But I'm bringing that now to this channel because we are trying to grow the followers on here, of course. So if you haven't already, click that subscribe button before I get in. But without further ado, here we go. So recapping one of the worst late season collapses in NFL history is hard to do, but I'm going to try my best to do, especially because it was my favorite team. It was a demoralizing ending for all Jags fans. Super embarrassing. I mean, let's just get into the start here. So, start of the season, we had very high expectations. We're favorites to win the AFC South and one of the more dark horse Super Bowl favorites, to be honest. Coming off the season where we made the playoffs for the first time in four or 5 years. We had young Trevor Lawrence, who had been continuing to play well, Doug Peterson and his coaching staff, which looked promising. So we looked good. We started off hot, in fact. We start off 2-1 with a big win to start in week 1 at the Colts. Then lost a few games, but then went to London and won both games back-to-back weeks in England across the pond. So those were big wins against the Bills specifically, which is probably our biggest game of the year so far still. After that, though, it's kind of more mediocre weeks where we knock off the Titans at home and the Colts at home, some divisional teams, but obviously not great football still. I mean, solid football, don't get me wrong, but obviously not where we were at the end of the season last year. But we still continue in first by 2 games in the AFC South, so we're looking really good. End of November, we have 99% chance to make the playoffs, in really a perfect spot, if you ask me at least, playing good football, and we head on to the national spotlight for the second time of the year. We play at home Monday night against the Cincinnati Bengals, and this is where the train derailed. This is where our season really started to go downhill, really went south. So we played the Bengals. We were 10-point favorites in this one against Jake Browning, a game we really were expected to kill them. I mean, we were huge favorites in Jacksonville, and it went south. First half was okay. Second half was about as bad as second half can get. Trevor Lawrence, our star quarterback, got really injured, it looked like at least. Christian Kirk went down, our best wide receiver, and 4 other starting defensive players got hurt. This game was a total collapse. We ended up losing barely in overtime on a field goal. This game is what spelled trouble for us. After that, it went totally downhill. Lawrence ended up rebounding. Christian Kirk ended up missing the rest of the year, which ended up spelling trouble, of course. But Lawrence did return. He looked healthy, but he returned and sustained more injuries. He's been very injury prone this year. 4 injuries in total once the season wrapped up that caused practice time to be missed. So just a disappointing year it turned out for Lawrence. Most turnovers out of any starter. But after Bengals, it goes downhill. We lose 5 of our last 6 games. And some of these games we just should have won. We were playing the Browns and Joe Flacco, a team that has been hot lately. We should have beat them, in my opinion. We were playing in Cleveland, but we should have won that game. Then you look at games like the Buccaneers. We got killed on Christmas Eve. We should have won that game. You just look at games like that and you think, what else could we have done? And there's a lot we could have done, but let me just get into some parts where I think could have been improved on. And first of all, running game. Running game was so much worse this year than last year. ETN, don't get me wrong, he played a really good season, to be honest. Run blocking sucked. Our offensive line continued to regress as the year went on, and that was a problem. It was a problem for Lawrence. It was a problem for ETN. It was a problem for Bigsby. It was a problem all around. Our offensive line continued to struggle, specifically Luke Fortner at center. Really, really, really rough season. Defensively, on the defensive line, pass rushing was just a problem. Besides Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen, both had 10-plus sacks. Besides that, our next biggest sack leader was Roy Robertson Harris, who had 3. That's a problem. That's not depth right there, and you can't be a playoff football team if you don't have depth, especially on your defense, which you rely on when your offense isn't playing well. So both sides of the ball had some major issues. Those are mine, in my opinion, the biggest issues. Run blocking, play calling was an issue with Press Taylor, and defensive schemes was a huge issue with the defensive line. It just didn't pan out defensively as the season went on. So you're just looking at a team that started off with such high expectations. Losing that many games in a row is a problem. I mean, losing to teams like the Buccaneers by 20 points just shouldn't happen. And games you should win and lose by that much is a problem. So then you go to this final week, the week that just happened. We're playing the Titans, and it's a win and in game. All we have to do is win. Our playoff chances are 55% chance. We have 55% chance to win this game. 5-point favorites. I'm pretty confident, to be honest. Even though we've lost 4 of our last 5 going to this one, I'm thinking we're going to right the ship. Lawrence is going to get back on track. ETN is going to have a good game, and it is everything but that. This game was totally atrocious, went about as bad as it could. Titans played spoiler 2 days before firing their coach, Mike Vrabel. We lost 28-20 in a game that we just didn't find a spark. That's what the guys continued to reiterate, that this season was different than the past years because we just didn't find a spark towards the end of the year, which we needed. We never found a spark. Doug Peterson said, of course, it was super frustrating watching this unfold as the head coach, Doug Peterson, that is. So this end of this last game, he said, really encompassed our season in a nutshell, which I believe is true. I mean, lots of hopes, and we just didn't live up to them, and that's hard to do when you're such a team, such a young team that's not experienced with that, a team that's really had low expectations in recent history for years and years. So I think that was one of the biggest issues this year was expectations. Consistency played a big role, but this last game was just atrocious. Some really bad play calls. There were some bad ref calls, I'm not going to lie. Some plays that just should have gone our way at the line, specifically some bad missed holding calls on Tennessee. Props to Tennessee, though. They played their hearts out. Henry's last game, Vrabel's last game, they just played spoiler on us, and it's so frustrating that ended up being to our arch rivals, the Tennessee Titans, at their place. This game was horrible, though. Some big key drops, some big missed throws by Lawrence, some bad turnovers. Everything went wrong in this game, and it's just so disappointing because it encompasses the end of the year, and we did not want that to happen. We wanted to make the playoffs. We would be hosting a playoff game in Duval County against the Cleveland Browns this weekend, and that would be awesome. That would really be awesome. Instead, the Jaguars tweeted out 2 weeks ago that playoff tickets were for sale, and that never happened. It was just such a sad ending. I mean, teams are making fun of us. Steelers got the last laugh against us. They snuck in even after we beat them and mocked them earlier this year. So lots of stuff kind of firing back at us. And after the season is where it really comes down on us hard. We made the decision. Doug Peterson made the tough decision to fire our entire defensive staff just yesterday. Mike Caldwell and his entire defensive staff is gone. They're complete. And honestly, I'm not super thrilled by this move. I think it would have made more sense to fire either our offense coordinator, Press Taylor, who Doug Peterson seems to have a weird connection with, or get rid of our general manager, Trent Baalke, who hired Urban Meyer and has a really unsteady tenure, and I think it's time for him to go personally. Clearly, Shad Khan and Doug Peterson don't want that to happen, though, because I believe this is going to be the end of the changes. Mike Caldwell and his entire defensive staff are out, which the thing about this that just gets me worried is that I think they might use this as a scapegoat to not fire anyone else. I think they might say, well, look at what we did. We fired 10 coaches. That defense wasn't our full problem this year. It was a problem, don't get me wrong. Offense was almost as big of a problem this year, towards the stretch at least. Just a lot of problems, and I'm glad heads have already been rolling because they need to be. We can't stay status quo again. We can't have the same roster, coaching and in player-wise. You just can't do that after such a crazy generational collapse that is one of the worst in football history, to be honest. So, just a super frustrating time to be a Jags fan. A once promising season has come crashing back about as hard as it can, right on us. And yeah, it's just hard to even recap how frustrating and embarrassing the end of the year was. But we move on. we move on to a hopefully good season next year where we can rebound. Texans and Colts, though, they're catching up to us, and it's really frustrating to see Texans make the playoffs. Colts continue to progress in the power rankings. We've got to make up ground next year, and we've got to make up ground the offseason. You can't just sit down and say, well, that was frustrating after such a generational collapse. There's got to be changes. There's already been some. There's got to be more on the roster too. This roster isn't fit for the Super Bowl. We've got to change that. We've got a lot of cap space, so I'm not worried about that. We've got to spend the money though, and we've got to make changes because this Jags team has to get right. It needs to get right for the fans, needs to get right for the city, or else this team is just going to come crashing down on the fans again, which can't keep happening. This past season was super demoralizing. The ending was super frustrating. Against their arch rivals, we got crushed. We got played spoilered on, and the Jags are out of the playoffs after starting 8-3, their best start since 2007. We will now miss the playoffs entirely and will be left in January with nothing. So on that note, on that frustrating note, I am going to end this video, but thanks so much for tuning in. I will continue to post these Spilling the Teal videos on this channel. Please check our other videos out and consider subscribing if you aren't already. And go Jags. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.